Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, happy Tuesday morning, everybody, and welcome to this edition of this episode. I don't know why I keep saying edition, this episode. This episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. This is going to be one of those episodes where I'm probably going to piss off some people. I'm going to cause other people to be perplexed. And I may actually regret having done this particular episode. Sometimes I think I would be better off if I just kept my thoughts to myself. But then I think about all of the experiences that I've had, you know, not just practicing law, which I can use in the podcast, not just as the commissioner of the International Arabian Horse Association, which those experiences I can use to speak and talk to people about things. And my experience, not only in talk radio, but to back up just a little bit, my 6 years experience in the federal government, I feel an obligation. I mean, at my age, with my experience, if I don't say these things, and if there's not a record of these things, this is why, and quite frankly, this is one reason why, among many, including the fact I'd probably end up having to talk to a divorce lawyer first, but I could not go back into government service. And probably, not to say I couldn't, you know, move to some small town and be a city councilman or the dog catcher or something. I might be able to do that. But I don't think I could ever run for public office. And I don't think I could ever, you know, be appointed as the secretary of some cabinet department at the state or federal level. Because after 13 years on the radio, all my opponents would have to do is hire an opposition research firm and go through everything I've ever said on the radio or on this podcast and twist it around and use it against me. Or in some cases, not even have to twist it around. Just, here's what he said. Today is going to be one of those days. And I will start it out by telling you that I have kept my mouth shut throughout the entire conversation about this particular issue, which I haven't told you what the issue is yet. But I've kept my mouth shut during the debate on this issue until today. And you ask, well, why today? Well, because the issue is the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. And I'm talking about it today because the president last week or over the weekend signed the legislation that had been passed almost unanimously, but it wasn't. There were a few that were opposed to it, that voted against it. The bill's now been passed, and everybody's patting themselves on the back, and everybody is absolutely enamored with themselves by what they've done by passing this extension of the Victims Compensation Act. Now, I emphasize the word victim because I would imagine that most people think of the Victims Compensation Fund, which is the technical nomenclature for the legislation, is not about first responders. It is only partially about first responders. So let me start out this whole topic by saying this unequivocally. I believe that the federal government owes the first responders compensation. They owe the first responders. I want to be very specific about that. They owe the first responders, the actual firefighters themselves, or the actual urban search and rescue team members, which in almost all cases come from fire departments around the country. We as a nation owe them compensation for the ill effects and for the health effects of what they did in the days and weeks, if not months, after the attacks of September 11, 2001. So you got that? I agree that the federal government owes them compensation. And let me explain why, because I think you should understand why, too. Not just a blanket statement about, oh, well, Michael Brown agrees that the firefighters and rescue workers ought to be compensated for the ill effects, for the health effects that they suffered from what they did on 9/11. Let me explain why. And the reason why is quite simple. We actually called them to duty. Much like we call soldiers in the military to combat. We called those firefighters and rescue workers, police officers, we called them to duty that day. And when I say we, many of you may think, well, wait a minute, they were members of the NYPD or the NYFD. Didn't they call them to duty? Well, yes, they did. But once it was declared a presidential disaster, the federal government became responsible and managed everything that took place at ground zero. So I think that we as taxpayers from all over the country owe those first responders a duty. We have a moral obligation to compensate them for the ill health effects that they suffered immediately and long term because of what they did. Now, also let me explain why. There's another reason why I think that we owe them this. And we owe them this because if you recall, and this has been in the news too, because I remember at the time thinking, that just can't be right. But despite my raising questions about it or talking about it in the Consequence Management Committee as we undertook to respond at the federal level to all the things that occurred on 9/11. You may recall that the Environmental Protection Agency and a few other departments declared that the air was safe to breathe. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist. In fact, you didn't have to even be, you could have been just a dummy undersecretary. Well, no, it wasn't the undersecretary at the time. It was the deputy director of FEMA. Just be the dummy deputy director of FEMA at the time to know that there was no possible way that the fumes from those buildings as they imploded, with all of the material that goes into the construction of the buildings and all of the material that goes into the offices and the warehouses, all of the different kinds of businesses that were there, the automobiles that were parked in the garages below, the fire trucks that were demolished, all of the things, the power lines, everything that was utterly physically destroyed on that day. As that continued to burn, long after the attacks were over, for anybody to say that that air was safe to breathe has got to be smoking some really good dope or just lying. There, I said it. So I believe that we owe them a compensation for what we asked them to do on that day. But here's what you need to know about the Victims' Compensation Fund. It is not just for firefighters. If you Google 9/11 First Responders Fund, you will get a Wikipedia entry as one of the top entries in Google or DuckDuckGo or Bing. So let me just, so some of you won't have to spend the time looking at Wikipedia. I Googled just now 9/11 First Responders Fund. And what came up as the top article in the Wikipedia article is titled September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. This brings back incredible memories for me because of the discussions that we had in the aftermath of 9/11 about the role and responsibility of the federal government. Let me read you the first paragraph. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund was created by an act of Congress. It was called the Air Transportation Safety and System Stabilization Act. You can find it at 49 U.S. Code, Section 4101. It was enacted shortly after 9/11 to compensate the victims of the attack or their families in exchange for their agreement not to sue the airlines that were involved in the attacks. Let me rephrase that, because I think to say the airlines that were involved in the attacks is really misstating what occurred. It should be that the Air Transportation Safety and Stabilization Act, enacted shortly after 9/11 to compensate the victims of the attack or their families in exchange for their agreement not to sue the airline corporations whose planes were hijacked on that day. Now you understand, it's not just for firefighters or cops or other first responders. It's actually for victims. During the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we spent an inordinate amount of time trying to define, within FEMA, what the declared disaster area would be. Now, many people think that the declared disaster area is ground zero. Well, it's not. Initially, it was just ground zero. Then it expanded to areas like a certain direction from Canal Street, from the Hudson over to the East River, down to Battery Park. And then over time, within a year, I think, if I recall correctly, it grew to not only all 5 boroughs of New York, but it grew to parts of New Jersey and Connecticut. It grew way beyond just the immediate area. Now, why is that important to understand? It's important to understand that because now we are going to compensate people whose businesses were affected or whose lives were affected in some way, and I'm not even talking about medical stuff right now. We're now going to start using federal dollars to affect not just firefighters, first responders. I'm just going to use the term first responders, okay? So we're going to use money not just to compensate first responders for the ill health effects of what they did in the days, weeks, and months afterwards. But we expanded that area to include all of New York City, all 5 boroughs, and parts of New Jersey and Connecticut. We then had to figure out, because we were then under pressure by Congress to try to figure out, well, what about people who were there in New York, but actually live, say, in Denver, Colorado, or Houston, or Dallas, or Fort Worth, or Los Angeles, or some Los Angeles? What do we include them in the fund? I honestly don't remember what the answer to that was. But as you can tell, it began to grow and grow and grow. Here's what I want you to think about. Did we as a government owe compensation to people who were on the planes or the family members of the people who were on the planes that were hijacked and crashed that day? Do we as taxpayers owe them compensation in exchange for them agreeing not to sue the airline? I will tell you the rationale for a positive answer, for a yes to that question, is that if we allowed everybody who was on one of the planes and their families to sue the airlines would soon be bankrupt. Well, airlines have come and gone and been bankrupt and not bankrupt throughout the history of this country. Pan Am, where's Pan Am? Eastern Airlines? The Trump shuttle? I mean, come on. Airlines go into and out of bankruptcy almost on a regular basis, although right now they're doing actually fairly well because of new designs and lower fuel costs, all sorts of factors. But I want you to think about why, and the rationale, let me tell you what the rationale was within the federal government. Within the federal government, the rationale was that we should offer them compensation in exchange not to sue in order to keep the airlines afloat, because we had also grounded the airlines and told them for what was it, 11 days or something, that you couldn't fly. So the federal government was responsible in part for their not being able to fly. That was just a rationale, because the real reason was we had been attacked by terrorists who used airplanes. And somehow the federal government writ large felt an obligation to protect the airlines from lawsuits for failure to keep the hijackers off the airplanes. Got that? That was the original purpose of the Air Transportation Safety and Stabilization Act that everybody kind of now knows, well, which I knew in the vernacular as the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, and which most people now think of as the 9/11 First Responder Fund. Let me posit a question. For those of you who are struggling with this or think that I'm completely lost my mind, or that how dare I question the payment of, now remember, I'm not questioning the payment of monies to the first responders. I don't question that at all, because we task them to go to that dangerous area and to work through that rubble. We are responsible for that as a nation. But let's talk about the victims. If we owe the victims of 9/11, the people who happened to work in the towers on that day, did the federal government, did we cause that to occur? Now, I know that there might be somebody in this audience that is a 9/11 truther, and they believe the conspiracy theories, which blow my mind away. They believe the conspiracy theories that somehow the federal government knew about these attacks and encouraged these attacks and wanted the attacks to occur, and in fact that we blew up, WTC-7. Well, I absolutely refuse to engage in a discussion about those conspiracy theories. But think about, for a moment, the people that were in those the two main towers, WTC-1 and WTC-2. Is it, or was it, the federal government's responsibility to compensate them for their damages? They could have sued the Saudi government. They could have sued the airlines. They could have sued any number of people that they think are responsible for the proximate cause of the damages or the deaths of the people that died or were injured on that day. We have a legal system in place and trial lawyers at the wazoo to do those kinds of lawsuits. But the federal government decided we didn't want the airlines to face those lawsuits, so the federal government decided that we would almost immunize the airlines from lawsuits by saying, if you will come over here to this fund and agree not to sue the airlines, we will compensate you. So let me ask this question. Do we owe compensation? Do we owe compensation to the victims of the Alfred E. Murrah bombing? Do we? Because I can make if the rationale is that the federal government owes money to the victims of 9/11 for whatever reason, but we owe them, why don't we owe compensation to the victims of the Murrah building bombing? Why don't we owe money as the federal government to the victims of the Fort Hood terror attack? Why don't we owe money to the victims of the San Bernardino shooting, another terrorist attack? Why don't we owe compensation to the victims of the Boston bombing, another terrorist attack? That's a pregnant pause. I honestly want you to think about that for a second, because I don't believe that we do. If, for example, the best way to show absurdity is to be absurd. So let me be absurd for a second. Let's say that China, Chairman Xi, or Russia, Vladimir Putin, or I don't know, just some asshole country. Let's just say that Maduro in Venezuela decides that they want to physically attack the United States. So they line up their Air Force, they line up their Navy, and they set sail for the West Coast, or in the case of Venezuela, maybe they come up the Gulf or they go up to the East Coast. Russia starts moving over to the Atlantic. World War III is about to commence, and boom, it starts happening. the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Russians and the Venezuelans are attacking. Oh, maybe the Canadians too. Maybe the Canadians say, "Oh, this is our chance to finally get back at the Americans." So now the Canadians are bombing us, the Ruskies are bombing us, the Chinese are bombing us, and the Venezuelans are bombing us, and civilians are getting killed left and right. It's an act of war. It's an act of terrorism. Do we owe the people that are killed compensation? Do we? I don't think that we do. It's an act of war. Acts of terrorism are the equivalent of an act of war. They're just done by non-state actors. Although some might argue that 9/11 was done by non-state actors with the tacit approval or support of a state actor, namely Saudi Arabia. It's a topic for another discussion another time. So let me play for you. It's a little longer than I'd like, but I want you to listen to Jon Stewart, because everybody talked about Jon Stewart and his battle for the first responders. CBS covered it this way.
Jon Stewart's latest impassioned plea to help 9/11 first responders sickened by the attack is giving the issue new urgency in Washington. Dozens of police, firefighters, and others joined Stewart at an emotional Capitol Hill hearing yesterday. The former Daily Show host blasted Congress for allowing a fund that was set up to pay for their health care to run short of money.
Behind me, a filled room of 9/11 first responders, and in front of me, a nearly empty Congress. Your indifference costs these men and women their most valuable commodity, time. It's the one thing they're running out of. This should be flipped. This hearing should be flipped. These men and women should be up on that stage, and Congress should be down here answering their questions as to why this is so damn hard and takes so damn long. They did their jobs with courage, grace, tenacity, humility. 18 years later, do yours. Thank you.
Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill. Nancy, this issue has been very important to Jon Stewart.
It has, and he and many others fear that these first responders are being forgotten, that the country and Congress have moved on after 18 years. They have seen this funding get held up before for political reasons, and they worry that it's going to happen again.
Now, I'll just pause it there because the story goes on for another minute or so. But did you ever hear any reference to anybody other than a first responder? Now, I agree with every single thing that Jon Stewart said. Every single thing. But what drives me nuts is the total lack of knowledge, understanding, or recognition that this fund is much more than just taking care of first responders. I looked up some of the law firms that are representing 9/11 victims. One website I found, I'm not going to give you their names, has a whole page. It's called WTC Victim Compensation Fund Eligibility Requirement Change Information. Changes in the Victim Compensation Fund eligibility requirements may now qualify you or a loved one for a claim, even if you were previously denied. New expanded eligibility requirements define an eligible claimant as. Now, you tell me if this is limited to first responders. An eligible claimant is any individual or personal representative of a deceased individual who suffered physical harm or was killed as a result of the terrorist-related aircraft crashes of September 11, 2001, or the rescue and recovery efforts during the immediate aftermath of such crashes, or the debris removal efforts that took place in the immediate aftermath of those crashes. This means that now area residents, office workers, business owners, students, cleanup and construction workers, rescue and recovery workers, as well as first responders, are potentially eligible for claims if they have been diagnosed with a qualifying illness or cancer and were present within a specified period of time within specified geographical locations, which of course has been expanded to include they actually put it in here. I don't have to look it up. The area in Manhattan that is south of the line that runs along Canal Street from the Hudson River to the intersection of Canal and East Broadway, north on East Broadway to Clinton Street, and east on Clinton Street to the East River. Any areas related to or along routes of debris removal, such as barges and fresh kills. Fresh Kills is an area on Staten Island, you've heard me talk about it before, where we took all of the debris to be sorted. This fund is humongous. This fund will last until the year 2090. Not just for first responders. So, I guess the whole point of this tirade is to get it off my chest that when you hear the news about the 9/11 First Responders Fund, yes, I think we should be paying the compensation for those who worked at Ground Zero or worked at Fresh Kills or that were on the barges taking the toxic debris from Ground Zero to Fresh Kills, because we asked them as a nation to go do that. But where I think this is a tough topic for me, I don't think we owe the victims. I'll give you an example. Now, I know exactly what the response is going to be, so I'll get to the response that I know many people will think. Some of the people who died in the World Trade Center, 1 and 2, worked for financial firms that made so much more money than what this fund is ever going to be able to compensate those families for, and had life insurance or other compensation that they were entitled to from their companies that far exceeded what this fund could provide them, so those families never participated in the Victims' Compensation Fund. And I know some of you are thinking, well, but what about the janitor that didn't have, a $25 million life insurance policy, or didn't work for Cantor Fitzgerald, or didn't work for one of the brokerage houses and didn't have all of that? Well, that's where it gets tough, because my question to you is, that person was a victim of a terrorist attack, just like all of those other victims, the Murrah Building, Fort Hood, San Bernardino, Boston Marathon. We didn't create funds for any of them. And every single one of those occurred, well, I take that back, not the Murrah Building. But with the exception of the Murrah Building, all those other terrorist events that I just talked about occurred after 9/11. So why are we paying this? And should we be paying this? I don't think that we should. I thought that it set a horrible precedent. And I thought that somebody would argue that, well, if you did this for 9/11, why don't you do it for the Boston bombers victims? Why don't you do it, or why didn't you do it for the victims of the Murrah Building? Why didn't you do it for the victims of San Bernardino? You see, it was a slippery slope. And it was a slippery slope trying to protect the airlines. So now you know the rest of the story, or perhaps the entire story, or maybe enough of the story, enough of the story that maybe now you'll read more and study more about the Victims' Compensation Fund and understand that when you hear all of the arguments for it because we have to take care of first responders, I agree. But the fund is much more than that and is going to cost us much more than what's been allocated because it's not just first responders. If you're pissed off at me now, I understand. But at least you know I told you what I thought. At least I told you what's been bugging me about this whole conversation since this came up in the very first time that Jon Stewart hit the ground in Washington, D.C., and the media started covering it. I wanted to scream at my television or radio every single time I heard somebody talk about the first responders because, quite honestly, in my opinion, while we owe that debt and we owe that obligation to first responders, I felt like they were using first responders and ignoring the other victims because if they really started talking about the other victims, there might be other people in the country that would say, whoa, time out. Let's bifurcate this. Let's deal with first responders. But why would we continue to compensate victims? Because that might set a precedent that we don't want to set. You know, this is one of these topics where if you have the opportunity on the Facebook page, in fact, I will put up on the Facebook page a post that says, tell me what you think about what I said about the 9/11 Victims Fund. So you do that by going to facebook.com/Michael D. Brown. You have to like that page. And once you like that page, you can then ask to join the discussion group if you're not already a member of the discussion group, and that's where the question will be. Because I sincerely would like to know if you think I'm a nut job. Well, I know many of you already think I'm a nut job, but that's why you listen to me. If you think that we should be, look, as I said, I believe we should be compensating the firefighters and the first responders and the cops and the others. But what do you think about this issue that it's not really just about first responders? How many of you ever even knew that this was the Air Transportation Safety and System Stabilization Act that was for all of these victims, not just first responders, and that now we've extended these benefits well into 2090 or whatever the last year is. And we'll probably have that battle again. Obviously I won't be around unless there's some medicinal miracle. I won't be around to see what the argument is in 2090. So let me know. And the best place to do that's going to be on Facebook. Facebook.com/Michael D. Brown. Ask to join the discussion group, and I'll post the question there. I really would like to know your thoughts. I'll be right back. Let's change to something else. Oh, equally depressing, but something else. So MSNBC had a guest on that claims that Trump's bigotry and racism could lead to a horrible civil war.
And time again, in a short-sighted, bigoted approach that is sure to get him defeated next year. I do not understand it, and I never will.
Yeah, Joe. So on January 20th, 2017, Donald Trump put his hand on the Bible, technically two Bibles, and took the oath of the presidency to be a president for all of us. And since that day, since that moment, every hour, he seems to just prove that to be wrong. Right? He is not a president for black people. He's not a president for women. He's not a president for brown people. He's not a president for the LGBTQ community. He chooses to just double down and triple down on bigotry and racism. And now what we are seeing in 2019, a modern day president who is choosing to use racism, division, hatred, to win, thinking he's going to win 2020 with that. And so I say to folks who are watching, we cannot allow this to happen. We have to figure out, who are we as a country moving forward? Who are we? Do we want this? Right? Because all of this is going to come down to November 2020. And I say to Republicans, especially Republicans leadership, please speak up. Enough is enough. We are a young democracy. We really are. You know, I was really struck by what Ignatius was saying, David Ignatius was saying. I don't know where Donald Trump wants to take this, but it's wherever it is, it's going to be dangerous. It could lead to some sort of horrible civil war.
First of all, we're not a democracy, we are a republic, and you know that. But I wouldn't expect this dummy from this spokesperson for MoveOn.org to understand the difference. But let's get one thing clear. First of all, what Donald Trump is doing is not leading us to civil war. If we've reached the stage in this country, you know what she's referring to. She's referring to Trump's tweets about Elijah Cummings and his congressional district in Baltimore, Maryland, which turns out to be just almost as bad as Nancy Pelosi's district in San Francisco. Just a real S-hole place. Which is horrible to say because if you've ever been to Baltimore, it's actually a great city, but, you know, Baltimore, like any other Democrat-controlled city, has just gone down the toilet. But to the point that it's going, well, before we get to the point about the Civil War, let me just finish the earlier point. If we have reached the stage in this country where you cannot criticize a member of Congress like Elijah Cummings because he is black, something's wrong. You should be able to criticize me or my Asian friends or my black friends or my Hispanic friends, any of my friends, my gay friends. I don't think I have any transgender friends. I'll have to ask some of them. I don't think I do. But that's what they're trying to do. As I watch this unfold over the past couple of days, it's been nothing more than just an attempt to claim racism because Donald Trump is criticizing a black person for indeed legitimate reasons. He has done nothing to fix his district. Nothing. And he's not going to either. But I want to focus on what this woman from MoveOn.org said. That somehow what Trump is doing is leading us close to a civil war.
So I was really struck by what Ignatius was saying, David Ignatius was saying. I don't know where Donald Trump wants to take this, but it's wherever it is, it's going to be dangerous. It could lead to some sort of horrible civil war.
Where's the threat of a real civil war coming from? Andy Ngo, you know, the young gay Asian journalist that's been covering Antifa. The only one that's been covering Antifa as far as I can tell. I mean, other conservative outlets have him on, but I don't even see the conservative outlets. Fox News, I'm talking to you. I don't even see Fox News covering Antifa independently. They're relying on Andy Ngo. And part of that may be because they are now fearful to go out when Antifa is in Portland or wherever they happen to be destroying property and beating up people. Anyway, Andy Ngo was on Fox News. Proving my point, Fox News didn't want to go out and do the coverage, so they bring Andy Ngo in. Let's bring in the poor gay Asian young kid that is barely able, if not able at all, to defend himself, who gets beat up, has a somewhat of a brain injury. Let's bring him in and talk to him about how dangerous Antifa is. Yeah, that's a lot easier than us going out and doing it. So I had nothing but accolades for Andy Ngo and his work. If you want to follow him, I think it's on Twitter, it might be Mr. with no period, Mr. Andy Ngo, and his last name is spelled NGO, like non-government organization, Andy Ngo. He is a tenacious reporter about Antifa and the threat that they are. So Friday night he's on Laura Ingram's show on Fox News. And the question arises about whether or not Antifa is trying to start a revolution.
That's a great question. So a lot of attention is paid to these incidents of the street hooliganism, which is one aspect of their tactics. But more important, I think, is ideology, which you mentioned. They're working towards a political revolution. They're made up of anarchists and communists. And these acts of violence and vandalisms that they're meant to not only target citizens, but they're meant to polarize society. It's meant to also delegitimize our institutions that uphold the laws, for example. So they have a lot of hate and for law enforcement, for border enforcement. And you see it reflected in their chants as well as where they target their acts of violence when it's not just directed at citizens. Most of them will probably call themselves Marxists if they had to pick a philosopher that influenced them the most. I'm still trying to understand and comprehend how coherent their ideology is, because this movement, as we understand in the United States, really crystallized after 2016, after the election of Donald Trump. So there hasn't been much academic research into how are they organized, who writes their literature, what are all the books of literature. We have sort of an idea. Mark Bray, an academic at Dartmouth. Oh, he is, and actually he donates. He says in his book that proceeds from it are going towards legal funds for Antifa. But that's a side point. Antifa, I say, are masters of doublespeak. You see in the name itself, anti-fascists, they're anything but. When they say that they're engaging in self-defense, it's actually premeditated offensive violence. So, and they appropriate words that mean one thing to one audience and dog whistle to their followers something else.
So the bottom line is, Antifa is the threat to the Republic, not Donald Trump. You know, I think we so easily lose sight of how nasty politics can be. And I think what's occurring, I think I said this in yesterday's podcast. While some people may find Donald Trump's tweets offensive, if you step back and if you were to just read the tweet and not know that it was from Donald Trump, you might say to yourself, yeah, well, that's the truth. Yeah, well, I agree with that. But because it comes from Trump, those who have Trump derangement syndrome end up going into some sort of apoplectic spasm of some sort. Those who are never Trumpers just see, it's proof this guy is not fit to be president. And for those of us who find the tweets, both funny, sometimes unpresidential, but are willing to look at them rationally, go, yeah, but it's the truth. And if he's going to attack a black congressman, not because he's black, but because of his policy positions, and all the left can do is scream racism, you know you've hit a nerve. So pay attention to Antifa. It is not Donald Trump that's going to bring this nation to a civil war. It's the progressive, Marxist, fascist left. That's who will bring us to a civil war. I'll be right back. In the good news story division of the good news division story of today, House Judiciary Democrat Jamie Raskin says that they are actually in an impeachment investigation. Woohoo!
You're on your own there. We don't need it. What's going on is that I think too much has been made of the phrase an impeachment inquiry. We are doing what our court filing says we are doing, what I said we are doing, and that is to say we are using our full Article I powers to investigate the conduct of the president and to consider what remedies there are. Among other things, we will consider obviously whether to recommend articles of impeachment. We may not do that. We may do that, but that's the conclusion at the end of the process. And you may want to call that an inquiry or not. I think people, when they think of an inquiry, think of a formal House vote to direct the committee to hold an inquiry. That's happened in the past, but there have also been instances where it didn't happen. The committee is exercising its authority.
You know what I really think is going on here? This is Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. He's doing one of those stupid press conferences where everybody stands around because everybody wants to be in the picture, right? And, of course, Sheila Jackson-Lee from Houston is right next to her, right next to him, all snuggled up like, ooh, 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 let me talk, I can't wait to talk, ooh, I got to talk. I think what Jerry Nadler's doing is he's trying to comport with his leader, Nancy Pelosi, who says that we're not going down the impeachment track. Yet at the same time, he wants to because as a fellow New Yorker, his Trump derangement syndrome is a lot more. In fact, he's still infectious. He is still contagious. So I think Jerry Nadler is still wanting to talk about impeachment, but is trying to dance around it. It continues.
To investigate all these scandals and to decide what to do about them, which could include articles of impeachment. And we filed that with the court. We told that to the court. And we're going to do that.
But I was just going to say that there's no formal constitutional or statutory or even House rule for how an impeachment inquiry is to begin. And so it means different things to different people. But a lot of people believe we've been in an impeachment inquiry ever since we started looking into potential high crimes and misdemeanors and the misconduct of the executive branch. Other people think an impeachment inquiry doesn't begin until you actually have articles of impeachment. I would say we are in an impeachment investigation. And as to the results of the investigation, it could lead to articles of impeachment or it could lead to something else. But from my personal standpoint, I think we are in an impeachment investigation.
And for that, I am deeply grateful. Continue it. Because, one, I don't want Democrats legislating. I understand that it detracts from President Trump doing his job. But so far, I haven't seen that it's really affected him doing his job. And as long as the Democrats are in impeachment investigation and impeachment mode, and they're having that battle within their own caucus, that's good for us. So you know what, kids? Go ahead and have your little impeachment inquiry all you want to. Have at it, because I don't think the American public is anywhere near where you think they are. Hang on. Be right back. For those of you that have been living in Colorado lately, and I'm sure it's hot, it's hot everywhere. I keep reading the headlines that it's hot in Paris, it's hot in New York, it's hot here, it's hot there. Well, the last I checked, north of the hemisphere, it's summertime. And summertime is hot. But seriously, this is for the ladies in the audience. Do you find yourself uncomfortable sweating through your fabric? Do you have to change shirts every 3 seconds because your boob sweat is real? I get it. You don't have to explain. Every woman on the planet has been there. Well, I'm here to save you and your boobs from the heat wave wherever you live. I want to introduce the Cool 58 bra coolers that will make all your summer dreams come true. To those men out there that have no idea what I'm talking about, you dummies, pay attention. Boob sweat. Boob sweat is very real, and it's a real thing. It's a problem that, unfortunately, we can't control. So, yes, this will come in handy. All you have to do is pop them in the freezer, the refrigerator, or put them in some ice water until they freeze solid. You also don't have to worry about the inserts getting too cold because they only go down to 58 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can last up to 2 hours. It's a glorious product. According to the description, these are to be used when you are overheated, and sometimes all you need is just a refreshing cool down in all the right places. Here's how I would describe them. They're ice packs or cool gel pads for your boobs. Now, you can find them on Amazon, but the ones that I really like are from Pillar Products. The Pillar Products cooling packs come in 2 sizes, one for cup sizes A, B, and C, and another one for D cups or larger. And every order comes with a round pair of cooling packs and 2 sky blue cotton covers for only $40 each. It sounds like a commercial, doesn't it? You can also purchase a soft side polar cooler to carry the inserts in. It's just, look, this is just a dream come true for women that have hot boobs. And of course, it makes me think, aren't all boobs hot? I just, you know what they say. Desperate times, desperate measures. I haven't reached that point yet. Man boobs. I haven't found one for man boobs yet. But what we really need, well, if you want to get your wife something in the summer that says nothing but I love your boobs, Amazon. Yes. Pillar Products. Freezer. Gel packs for your lady's bra. Oh. We haven't had much climate news lately, but I finally found something worth talking about. Finally, maybe have found a solution. Iceberg-making submarine aims to tackle global warming by refreezing the Arctic. A team of designers led by a name that I can't pronounce, Billy Bob, proposes refreezing seawater in the Arctic to create miniature modular icebergs. Don't we call those like ice cubes? Miniature modular icebergs? I've got some right here. Yeah, that's in my Diet Coke. I have miniature modular icebergs. Anyway, this team of designers led by this guy whose name I am not even going to try to pronounce. Where are they from? Indonesia. Proposes refreezing seawater in the Arctic to create these miniature modular icebergs using a submarine-like vessel in a bid to combat climate change. The Indonesian designer worked on the prototype with collaborators Denny something I can't pronounce and Fiera something I can't pronounce for an international competition organized by the Association of Siamese Architects. No, I'm not making that up. An international competition organized by the Association of Siamese Architects. Insert your own joke. The main goal, the article says, the main goal of this idea is to restore the polar ecosystem, which has a direct effect on the balance of the global climate, said the designer, adding that in this scenario, it is better to prevent than cure. The submarine-like vessel would submerge to collect seawater in a central hexagonal tank. Turbines would then be used to blast the tank with cold air and accelerate the freezing process. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I don't pretend to be one, but you're going to manufacture a submarine-like vessel. Then it's got some sort of hexagonal tank. Then you're going to have turbines that are going to be used to blast the tank with cold air. So you're going to have refrigerant and a motor and something to power the refrigerant to freeze the water. Anyway, maybe I shouldn't be so cynical. The story continues. During this process, the vessel would return to the surface of the sea. So the little submarine that's going to freeze and make the ice cubes has to have power to get it below the surface and then bring it back up. During this process, the story says, the vessel would return to the surface of the sea and the tank would be covered to protect it from sunlight. A system of reverse osmosis would be used to filter some of the salt from the water in order to speed up the process. So now you've got a reverse osmosis system, which again is going to have energy from somewhere to do that. Once the water is, I know I'm skeptical, aren't I? Once the water is frozen, the vessel would submerge again, more power, leaving behind an ice baby. That's what it says, just in quotes, ice baby. Would leave behind an ice baby with a volume of about 2,027 cubic meters. These miniature icebergs would then cluster together in a honeycomb pattern to form a larger ice flow. Now, how do the little baby ice cubes know to cluster together? Oh, you must have some electronic device in them, or you're going to have a tugboat go around and circle them and pull them together with rope in order to form the honeycomb pattern. Does anybody see anything wrong with this idea besides me? I'm just thinking, refrigeration, reverse osmosis, pumping heat, doesn't that all take an awful lot of energy? And creating all that energy, doesn't that create heat? Don't you put that heat back in the water? Or does that heat go in the air? Wherever it goes, doesn't that then melt the poor little baby ice cubes? Never have a chance. But it's a great idea. And I've got to go to the next, next international convention of the Association of Siamese Architects. I'm just telling you what it says. Don't start yelling at me. Yes, baby ice cubes. It's going to turn around climate change. Ugh. Speaking of climate change, 4 climate scientists destroy the whole theory of, they don't destroy the theory of climate change. They prove that the climate changes.
I just want to read something that they should read this at the climate summit. I think they should really read this today to describe what's going on. And this is from a reliable source, American Meteorological Society Monthly Weather Review publication, that the Arctic Ocean is warming up. Icebergs are growing scarcer, and in some places the seals are finding the water too hot, according to a report by the Commerce Department at Bergen, Norway. Reports from fishermen, sea hunters, explorers all over point to radical change in climate conditions. Why aren't they reading this? And hitherto unheard of temperatures in the Arctic zone. Exploration expeditions report scarcely any ice as far north as 81 degrees. Soundings show the Gulf Stream very warm. Masses of ice have been replaced by moraines of earth and stones, and it goes on and on. Within a few years, it's predicted that due to the ice melt, the sea will rise and make most coastal cities uninhabitable.
What year was that written?
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. This is 1922. This is November 1922, and this is real. This is not urban legend.
Yeah.
This has really happened. This was really reported. It was warm then, and then guess what happened after that? Of course, it cooled off, and so I just had to throw that. Monthly weather review.
Meteorological Society publication.
These were all facts. It was extremely warm back then in the polar regions.
Facts. Yes. The climate changes. It always has. It always will. I'll be right back. In news of just one more thing to worry about, killer amoebas.
A North Carolina man has died from a brain-eating amoeba. Officials say 59-year-old Eddie Gray got infected swimming at a water park. Doctors say the amoeba is found in warm freshwater. If ingested through the nose, a rare infection can develop. The CDC says that since 1962, there have been about 145 cases. All but 4 were fatal.
All but 4 were fatal. 57 years ago. That comes out to what, about 2.5 per year out of 300 plus million Americans? Why does everything have to be based on fear? And I'm sorry this guy died. Don't get me wrong. I'm really sorry that he died. But when we talk about risk, 2.5 people over the past 57 years out of 300 million. Okay. Don't worry about the killer amoeba. Well, maybe you should. You might be, you do the statistical analysis and see what your chances are. Oh, actually, maybe there are some things to worry about. How about this one?
And talk about a close encounter. An asteroid barely missed Earth this week. The space rock is named Asteroid 2019 OK. It whizzed past the Earth on Thursday at 54,000 miles per hour. It's several hundred feet across, and it came within 45,000 miles of Earth. That's actually less than a fifth of the distance to the moon. Scientists call the path uncomfortably close. Astronomers had not been tracking 2019 OK, which made the flyby all the more surprising.
Wait a minute. There's an asteroid coming within 45,000 miles of Earth, and nobody's tracking it? What are you guys looking at? Huh? What are you astronomers looking at? Start paying attention. Scared. Yeah, scared. Well, let's get a good taxpayer relief shot in, shall we? This one comes to us from 13 ABC, Norfolk, Virginia. 2 suspects accused of 7-Eleven robbery.
Know the name of the suspect who died in that string of 7-Eleven robberies in several cities. Police have identified him as 18-year-old Michael Moore. Now, police say a customer with a legal gun, shot him and another suspect. So right now, 18-year-old Ronald Brookins Jr. and 19-year-old Derek Simmons are facing several charges in connection to that robbery. In total, 4 7-Elevens were robbed early yesterday morning. That includes 1 at the oceanfront and 2 in Norfolk.
Well, that just proves what? That proves that eventually the odds are going to catch up with you, and, you keep robbing 7-Elevens eventually, well, you're going to get shot. Somebody's going to have a gun in one of those stores. Thugs are not the smartest people in the world. And this next taxpayer relief shot we have is not really a taxpayer relief shot. I think it can be more aptly described as a taxpayer relief crash.
That's right. It could have been much worse with more damage and more fatalities. It all started when Hernando police tried to pull over a stolen vehicle that was driving within city limits. Instead of stopping, that car took off, starting this deadly police chase. The car started driving on Commerce Street, evading officers before it was driven northbound onto Interstate 55 from a southbound lane. That meant they were going the wrong way on the highway. It traveled for approximately 1 mile before striking the guardrail near Mount Pleasant Road. You can still still see today the marks where that car made impact, and there's a large drop off underneath that bridge. Hernando police say that several passengers were thrown from that car when it made impact, but they have not given an exact number. We tracked down that stolen car, a maroon Nissan Maxima, and you can see it in this video here. It was in an impound lot, and the car is barely recognizable. It's just a shell of itself after this wild police pursuit. Coming up tonight on News Channel 3 at 10, we'll speak with locals who say they're tired of feeling like they're being targeted for violent crimes like this. Reporting live in Hernando, Peter Fleischer, WRAG News Channel 3.
Imagine that. Citizens are getting tired of feeling like they're being targeted by thugs. Well, that's why we do taxpayer relief shots. Because if I can convince just one individual to figure out some form of self-defense, a baseball bat, a 9-iron, or maybe a 9mm. But if you're going to get even a 9-iron, baseball bat, I still want you to train with it. Learn how to swing. Yes. Learn to watch for. Learn how to take somebody out with your 9-iron. Or get the 9mm and go to the shooting range and take your grandson or your granddaughter and teach them to shoot and have some fun. Taxpayer relief shots. Every single day, somebody in this country defends themselves because they're there and the cops are somewhere else. Not saying that's the cops' fault. It's just that they have other things to do, and they're not always going to be there exactly when you need them. That's why we do taxpayer relief shots. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Be sure and follow us on, you can subscribe to us on iTunes. You can subscribe to us on the iHeart app. And then be sure to follow us on social media. Instagram, Michael D. Brown. YouTube is youtube.com/Michael Brown Today. Facebook is facebook.com/Michael D. Brown. And if you like the page, you have to like the page and then ask to join the discussion group. Because remember, I said at the beginning of the podcast, I'm going to put up the question about whether or not you agree or disagree with me about the 9/11 Victims Fund. Because I really am curious your take on what I said at the beginning of this podcast. And then also follow me on Twitter at Michael Brown USA. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow.